Tonight is Erev, my grandfather, Grandpa Yecheskel Shraga Halevi Weiss's yahrzeit, which was Chaf Vov Nissan. Unfortunately, I didn't have very much time with him. He was nifter when I was only 9 years old, but those few short years played a role in my life, had an impact on me. The most important reason was because they had such an impact on my father, Zeidy Harry, who was my role model and for many years my best friend. Grandpa, to his misfortune, was an orphan at 3, so he pretty much raised himself. He came from a very, very fine family, and the family rallied round. The sisters helped to raise him, and he stayed from at a time where people who were living in normal circumstances weren't necessarily staying from, but he did. He was a businessman, a good businessman, a successful businessman. He traveled all over Europe. But wherever he went, he kept his principles, he kept his Yiddishkeit with him. Many of you know, actually all of you know, that we are a family of musicians. Where'd they come from? It doesn't come from the air. Of course, Grandpa was a Levi, so the Levium were big singers to begin with. But he and his brothers were known all over as daveners, people who would get up to the Amid and daven for the Amid, and were requested to daven for the Amid. There's a story, and it was known all over, of Grandpa and one of his brothers-in-law. Grandpa was in Germany. His brother-in-law was, I don't know, remember if he was in England at the time or in France, and it was Erev Yontif. And each one was going to be davening for the Amid in their own shtella. And they were talking about what they were going to sing. And one of the brothers wasn't sure about a niggin. He said, Haskell, sing this such and such to me. And Haskell starts to sing the niggin to him. The operator interrupts this conversation and says, have any idea how expensive this is? You are singing musical notes at such a price? So the Uncle Herman, says to him, are you paying for this call? She goes, no. I said, then get off the phone. And they continued to sing their Zmiris L'Covered, the Yontif that was upcoming. In that same tradition, Grandpa, once he came to America, was still well known as a chazan. Many times got up to the Amid to daven, but especially on Yontif when he was requested. There happened to have been a particular niggin that he wanted to use on that particular Yontif, but for the life of him, he could never remember how to start it. He just couldn't start it. He could sing it, but he couldn't start it. There was a little girl named Devorah who happened to have had another grandfather named Papa, Leibish Pinter, who sang that particular niggin. But how was Grandpa going to start this niggin if Leibish Pinter was in another shul singing the same one? So he figured out the solution. I call this song Papa's Niggin, and you could wake me up in the middle of the night and I would start to sing it, if you asked me to. Sometimes even if you didn't ask me to. Well, on this particular Shabbos, I was dressed to the nines. My hair was done. My dress was beautiful in Bobbi Weiss style. And Zeidy Weiss brought me to shul, took my hand, stood me next to Grandpa at the Amid. And at the appropriate time, Grandpa nodded to me. And that was my cue. And then he could do the rest of the niggin himself. But he needed me to start it. And this is one of my favorite stories ever. We had a very short time together, but I have a lot of beloved memories of him. His unbelievable Yiras Hashem, his unbelievable ability not to compromise, stood him, stood my father, stood the four brothers in good stead throughout their lives. I have a lot to be grateful to him for keeping us on the right derech, and of course for my beloved daddy, who was his role model, who was my role model. Maybe even a Neshama have an aliyah, and maybe Yemelitz Yosher for all of us who are following Baruch Hashem in his path.